She was going to die in a recycling bay, and nobody was going to notice until the smell gave her away. That thought arrived with clinical precision in Nirel's mind as she pressed herself into the gap between two compression units, her left side burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the machinery humming around her. The wound was older than she wanted to admit. 3 days, maybe 4. She'd lost count somewhere between the emergency jump and the crash landing that had deposited her in what she'd eventually identified as a human orbital station. She translated the signage phonetically. Tharkon 4 Transit Hub, Sector 9. She had no idea what Tharkon 4 was. She had no idea if her ship's distress beacon had fired before the hull split open like rotten fruit. She had no idea if anyone from her crew had survived. What she knew was the warmth spreading through her side meant infection, and Servani infections ran fast. Her secondary circulatory nodes were already responding. She could feel them laboring, throbbing in irregular patterns beneath the bioluminescent patches along her neck, patches that were currently the deep amber of acute physiological distress, rather than the cool silver she could usually maintain through sheer discipline. The amber would betray her. In the dark of the recycling bay, she might pass as a strange shadow, but if anyone came in with a light, she would glow like evidence. She had wrapped herself in something she'd found near the entrance, a garment she'd since learned humans called a tarpaulin, though she wasn't certain it was meant for wearing. It smelled of machine oil and something biological she couldn't name. She wore it anyway. She had been wearing impossibility for 4 days. The bay door groaned. Nirel stopped breathing. She had studied humans for 6 standard cycles as part of her diplomatic analysis work aboard the KSV Marauder. Studied them from a professional distance, through intercepted transmissions and behavioral reports, and the dry taxonomy of xenosociological data. She had written 3 internal memos arguing they were too emotionally volatile for formal first contact, and should be observed for at least another decade before any introduction was attempted. She had been considered thorough, rigorous, and correct. None of that was helping her now. The footsteps that came through the door were single set, unhurried, accompanied by the soft mechanical whisper of a maintenance cart. The person moving it was humming, a shapeless, wandering tune that seemed to have no particular destination, as unplanned as breathing. 1 pair of boots. Work scuffed, she determined from the sound. Not security, not military. The gate had no patrol rhythm, no alertness, no intention beyond whatever task had brought a human into a recycling bay at what her internal clock estimated was 0340 station time. She calculated her odds. They were not good. The cart stopped approximately 4 meters from her position. She heard the human set something down, heard the rustle of a bag opening, heard the small sounds of someone working without urgency or awareness that they weren't alone. She pressed herself smaller. Her wound pulsed. The amber in her neck patches brightened involuntarily, a physiological response to pain she couldn't suppress through willpower. And she watched the soft golden light spill across the floor between the compression units like the world's most inconvenient lamp. The humming stopped. "Hello?" The voice was male, youngish by human vocal standards, which meant almost nothing to her without more data. "Is someone back there?" She didn't answer. Obviously, she didn't answer. "Okay," he said, more quietly, as though he were talking to himself and had simply decided to include her. "I'm just going to say, if you're a person in trouble, I'm not going to make it worse. And if you're not a person, I'd still like to know because this is my bay and I'm kind of responsible for it." His bay. She filed that detail. Responsible. "My name's Seth," he added, after a pause. "I maintain this section. I'm not armed. I'm also, honestly, a little too tired to be frightened yet, so this would be a good time to talk to me if you're thinking about it." She was not thinking about it. The light from her neck patches disagreed, pulsing amber directly into the open space between them, and she watched Seth, the human named Seth, crouch down slowly until he could see her face through the gap in the machinery. She saw him register what she was. She saw the sequence move through him, confusion, calculation, something that might have been wonder, and then, unexpectedly, disarmingly, concern. Not for himself, for her. "You're hurt," he said. Just that. The words cracked something small inside her that she didn't have a name for yet. She had been trained in 17 human languages. She chose the one she was most fluent in. "I do not require assistance." Her voice came out thinner than she intended, weakened by days of near silence and insufficient hydration. It did not sound like someone who did not require assistance. Seth looked at the amber light spreading from her neck patches. He looked at the way she was holding herself. He looked at the tarpaulin she had arranged around her body in what she now suspected was not the conventional configuration, based on the particular quality of his expression. Okay, he said again, that infuriating word, gentle and non-committal and somehow also completely committed. Do you want me to pretend I didn't see you, or do you want help? This was not in any of her behavioral reports. She had no protocol for this. She chose the only answer that her body was currently capable of enforcing. I want you to pretend, she said, and then her secondary circulatory nodes failed in a synchronized collapse that her medical training told her was called a cascade event, and her operational experience told her was called losing, and she fell forward out of the gap between the compression units and onto the recycling bay floor. Seth caught her before she hit. She didn't know how he moved that fast. She didn't know how he knew to move at all. She only knew that instead of the floor, she landed in a pair of arms that smelled of machine oil and something warm, and that the human named Seth said something very quietly under his breath that her translation module rendered as a word used to express alarm. And then he was doing something that her culture had a very specific name for. He was carrying her. This was the moment that would rearrange everything, though neither of them knew it yet. Seth carried her to the maintenance office adjacent to the bay, a small room full of diagnostic screens and coffee smell, and a cot that he apparently used during long shifts, and he set her down with more care than the situation technically required. He was not graceful about it. He knocked his elbow on a shelf, swore quietly, and adjusted her position twice before he seemed satisfied that she was stable. He was, she realized, nervous, trying not to show it, trying harder not to make it her problem. You need fluids, he said. He was already moving toward a small storage unit. Can you drink water? Does water work for you? I have water. I have some kind of electrolyte thing that's orange flavored and probably terrible. And I have coffee, which I'm going to tell you right now is probably not appropriate for a medical situation. Water. The word cost her less than she expected. He handed her a container, sealed, which registered as meaningful, and she drank in careful increments, watching him over the rim. He was watching her back. He had the build of someone who worked physically, medium height, brown hair that had been recently cut badly enough to suggest he'd done it himself. His eyes were dark. He kept his hands visible, which she couldn't tell was intentional or accidental. What are you? He asked. Then immediately, sorry, that came out. Is that rude? I genuinely don't know the etiquette. It's informational, she said. I am Servani, from Nexarion. Seth Caldwell, from Ohio. He paused. That probably means nothing to you. It does not, she confirmed. But Ohio means you are from the north-central region of the country you call the United States, which means you are likely familiar with significant cold season weather events and possess some probability of having played a sport involving an oval ball. He stared at her. I have studied your kind extensively, she said, which seemed like the less complicated explanation. Huh. He pulled a chair close and sat in it backwards, arms folded over the top rail, watching her with an attention that was not aggressive but simply present. So what happened to you? She considered the question. She considered refusing it. She considered the amber light still pulsing weakly from her neck patches, which were not capable of lying even when she was. My ship was destroyed, she said. I was the only one who made it to an escape vessel. I have been attempting to remain undetected while I assess the situation. For how long? 4 days. His expression shifted into something complicated. 4 days alone, hurt, in a recycling bay. The recycling bay was only the most recent location. She had also spent time in a maintenance crawl space, a decommissioned loading dock, and what she was fairly certain had been a storage room for objects humans used in recreational competitive activities, based on the number of items shaped like cylinders. Seth was quiet for a moment. She was bracing herself for questions about her government, her purpose, her diplomatic status, whether her presence on this station constituted some kind of incident that needed to be reported to someone with more authority than a maintenance worker who thought he was responsible for a recycling bay. Instead, he said, I'm going to clean that wound. Can I? The simplicity of it undid her more than she was prepared for. She had built, over many years, in one catastrophic posting, a very specific architecture of guardedness. She knew exactly when she had built it. She had been 23 standard cycles old, on her first real diplomatic assignment to the Krellian border territories, when her supervising officer, a woman she had admired to the point of devotion, had handed her classified position data over to a political rival that had gotten 6 members of Nirel's team killed. Not killed in the violent sense. Removed. reassigned to posts so dangerous and remote they might as well not exist, in a political system that absolutely understood what it was doing. Nirel had survived it by becoming someone who did not trust the way she used to, reflexively and completely, the way she had before she understood that admiration was not armor. That architecture had held for 9 years. She'd maintained it through political maneuvering and hostile negotiations, and one memorable incident involving a Valoran trade delegation and a misunderstanding about the word gesture that had nearly become a war. It had not survived Seth Caldwell asking if he could help. Yes, she said. He worked quietly. He found a first aid kit of the human variety and supplemented it with things she guided him toward from her own emergency kit, which had survived because she'd had it on her person rather than aboard the ship. He was careful with her. He asked before he touched anything. Once, when she flinched without meaning to, he stopped completely and waited until she indicated he could continue. He made conversation throughout, the low, steady kind, about nothing in particular, about the station and its sections, and the particular temperament of the compression units in Bay 9. And she understood eventually that he was doing it to give her something to anchor to that was not the pain. "Why are you telling me about the compression units?" she asked at one point. "Because you look like you're about to go somewhere I can't follow," he said, "and I'd rather you stay here." He had no reason to want that. They had known each other for less than one standard hour. He was a maintenance technician on a transit hub in a system she had never planned to visit, and she was a Servani diplomatic analyst who had fallen out of a recycling machine gap into his life entirely by accident. And yet the amber in her neck patches had begun, slowly, almost imperceptibly, to shift toward something cooler, toward the color her people called provisional rest. The color that meant, in the involuntary language of Servani biology, that her body had decided, against all instruction from the rest of her, that she might, possibly, be somewhere safe. It was the first time that color had appeared in 9 years. She did not tell him what it meant. She didn't have the words yet for how to explain the weight of it. What she did was allow herself to lie back against the cot and feel the faint, continuous warmth of the station recycling its air and exist, without strategy, without assessment, without the exhausting performance of being fine, in a small maintenance office in Sector 9 of a transit hub she hadn't planned to survive. She slept. She woke to the sound of Seth's voice, low, tense, coming from just outside the door. She caught phrases in sharp fragments. "Can't just walk in here. This is a maintenance-restricted area." Followed by an authoritative voice she didn't recognize. Followed by Seth again, more firmly. "I'll get you the forms, but right now this section is tagged for contamination protocol, and I need a hazmat clearance before anyone enters." She understood what he was doing. He was lying to station security. For her. Someone he had known for, she checked her internal clock, 6 hours. She heard the authoritative voice again, skeptical now, and Seth's response, steady, exasperated, completely convincing. "Look, you want to fill out the hazmat exposure paperwork, be my guest. I'll get you the tablets. But I'm telling you the compressor's vented overnight, and I haven't even been in there myself yet." A pause, the sound of retreating footsteps. Then Seth came back in, closed the door, and looked at her with an expression that was trying to be calm, and was mostly succeeding. "There's a search," he said. "Customs flagged an unregistered vessel wreck. They're looking for survivors." "To help them?" she asked. She already suspected the answer. "To detain them for processing," he said, "which might be fine and might not be, and I don't know enough about how your people are treated in this system to make that bet with your life." This was the moment she understood she had been wrong about something fundamental. Not about humans, about herself. She had spent 9 years operating under the belief that protection was transactional, that you only extended it when you had enough information to make the calculation worthwhile, when the risk-to-benefit ratio supported the expenditure, when you had confirmed, through sufficient evidence, that the person receiving it had earned it. Seth had 6 hours of evidence. She had landed unconscious in his arms, covered in machine oil and alien distress signals, and he was lying to security officials, and she was watching the bioluminescent patches along his forearms. No, wait. He didn't have those. Humans didn't have those. She was watching the tension in his jaw and his hands, which told the same story anyway. "I have to tell you something," she said. He looked at her, waiting. "In my culture," she said carefully, "when a person carries another in their arms as you carried me, it is not a casual gesture. It is an act of declaration." She paused, because the next part required precision, and she needed him to understand it accurately, and not in the distorted way that dramatic moments sometimes produced in people. It means that the one who carries is announcing their willingness to be responsible for the one who is carried, to witness for them, to stand between them and harm. She held his gaze. It is, in certain contexts, the beginning of what you would call a marriage bond. Seth was very still. I am telling you this, she continued, not because I intend to hold you to a gesture you made without that knowledge, and not because I expect anything from you beyond what you have already given. I am telling you because, among my people, the one being carried always has the right to know what the one carrying them has declared, even accidentally, even unknowingly. She breathed. You declared for me, Seth. In my culture's language, spoken through your body when you had no translator for what it meant. I thought you should know what you said. The silence in the maintenance office was the kind that had weight to it. What does the person being carried say back? He asked. His voice was quiet, careful, like someone who understood they were standing on ground that mattered. She looked at the patches along her neck, silver now, cool and certain, a color she had not worn in almost a decade. The color her people called chosen witness, the color that meant she was choosing to be seen. They say, she told him, I heard you. The search moved through 3 more sections over the next several hours, and Seth guided it past Sector 9 with a combination of filed contamination reports and the absolute confidence of someone who had spent 4 years learning the administrative weaknesses of every system he was responsible for. When it was over, he sat down in his backwards chair, rested his chin on his arms, and looked at her with an expression that was tired and complicated and not at all sorry. I don't know what happens next, he said. Neither do I, she said. I sent a signal on a Servani-encoded frequency 2 hours ago, when you were talking to security. There will be a ship within 4 days, possibly fewer. So you have 4 days. I have 4 days, she confirmed. And then, because 9 years of guardedness had cracked open entirely, somewhere in the space between his declaration and her answer, and because the amber patches would have betrayed her anyway, I would like to spend them somewhere other than a recycling bay, if the option exists. He smiled. It was the first time she had seen him do it, and her xenosociological data had not adequately prepared her for the specific quality of it. The way it arrived a little unevenly, a little reluctantly, like something he'd almost decided not to give. The tarpaulin she had worn for 4 days was folded now on the shelf behind her, where Seth had placed it when he'd given her a proper thermal blanket from his locker. Such a small thing. She had thought at the time it was simply practical. She understood now that it was the first gesture in a language he didn't know he was speaking, given to someone who understood every word. Some translations don't require training. Some things the body says without permission, in the dark, in a maintenance office at 0340 station time, to a stranger who landed in your arms and needed somewhere safe to rest, and in the saying of them, accidentally, completely, with the full weight of meaning and none of the vocabulary. It changes you both in a way that will not be undone when the rescue ship arrives. It does not require ceremony. It does not require cultural fluency or perfect understanding or the erasure of every difference between 2 people from 2 entirely different worlds. It only requires someone to carry and someone to hear it, and the willingness of both to let that moment mean what it meant. She had been going to die in a recycling bay. Instead, she had been found.